For the first time since President Trump took office, a federal judge said that Trump and his administration are directly disobeying a federal court order, and Trump and his team must comply. Like now. But did the vice president suggest that that's not going to happen? This is a much bigger deal than you think it is. I'm going to explain why in a second. But first, this new order was issued today by the chief judge for the federal district court in Rhode Island in the case involving President Trump's executive order that pauses trillions of dollars in federal funding for grants and loan programs here in the United States. Technically, that order was rescinded one day after Trump issued it. But the state's attorneys general of 22 states in the District of Columbia filed a lawsuit saying President Trump does not have the power to freeze funding that had been appropriated by Congress in a law. Well, Judge McConnell issued a temporary restraining order against the Trump administration in late January, saying the Trump administration needed to keep the funding flowing while this case plays out. But since then, the states in D.C. went back to Judge McConnell, saying the Trump administration is not complying with his order. And in fact, the Trump administration responded and told Judge McConnell in a filing last night that they were not complying with his temporary restraining order in its entirety because they're trying to root out fraud. And they didn't believe the judge's order covered everything they were trying to do. Well, today, Judge McConnell made it very clear. His order is for everything. Judge McConnell said, the broad, categorical, and sweeping freeze of the federal funds is, as the court found, likely unconstitutional and has caused and continues to cause irreparable harm to a vast portion of this country. These pauses in funding violate the plain text of the TRO. Temporary restraining order. The judge went on to further clarify in today's order that the Trump administration must immediately restore the frozen funding until the court makes a final decision in this case, must immediately end any federal funding pause, and must comply with the plain text of the judge's temporary restraining order. But this opens up a much bigger conversation about the separations of powers. And let's not mince words here. Over the last few weeks, we've all witnessed the Trump administration trying to push the boundaries of Trump's power. But here's what you need to understand. That is not uncommon. Lots of presidents, when they come into office, push the boundaries of their power to further their goals and to try and follow through on their campaign promises. This is not new. There was a lot of controversy over President Obama's immigration policy that Republicans were furious about, saying Obama was picking and choosing what laws he followed. In the end, the Supreme Court sided with President Obama and said that his immigration policy was legal. President Biden did the same thing with student loans when he first came into office. The Supreme Court ultimately shot down his widespread forgiveness plan, saying it was unconstitutional. So he tried another way, as he was legally allowed to do. But those additional attempts were also stopped by the courts, and he complied with those federal judges' orders. And in the end, Biden could not fulfill his campaign promise of widespread student loan forgiveness. So what's unusual now is the Vice President of the United States is suggesting, in writing, that the judicial branch cannot control the executive's legitimate power. In essence, J.D. Vance is saying the executive branch is more powerful than the judicial branch, and perhaps the executive branch may not comply with the orders from the judicial branch. Now, I want to be very clear here. President Trump himself has not said this. Vice President Vance did. But today, Trump did suggest that no judge should be able to rule like McConnell did. Look, we're going to have to wait and see if the Trump administration is ultimately going to comply with Judge McConnell's order on this funding freeze issue. But we're seeing this kind of thing play out over and over. Not just in Judge McConnell's court, but in multiple courts across the country. These judges are blocking the Trump administration at almost every turn. This is a fight, no doubt, that the Trump administration is absolutely going to take straight to the United States Supreme Court to determine how far the powers of the executive go. Quickly, as you know, the Constitution set our government up with three co-equal branches of government: the legislative branch, which is Congress, the judicial branch, which are the courts, and the executive branch, which is the president and his administration. The Constitution gives each of those branches certain powers that it does not give the other branches. For example, the Constitution specifically says Congress has the power of the purse, and it gives Congress the power to make laws. It gives the executive branch the power to enforce laws, and it gives the judicial branch the power to interpret the laws. It also sets up a mechanism for each of those branches to check the other's power. A president can veto a law passed by the entire Congress, but the Congress can override that presidential veto, and the courts can declare a law passed by Congress or an executive order written by the president unconstitutional. The whole point of having these co-equal branches is so that one branch does not become more powerful than the others. So it's that last statement from Vice President Vance's tweet that says judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power that has a lot of people concerned. How is the vice president defining legitimate? Of course the president has legitimate power. The Constitution says so. But the president is not a king. That was pretty clear in the Constitution too. And to ensure that, the Constitution absolutely says the judicial system is the sole branch that has the power to interpret the laws, to decide whether something is legal or not. There's also a lot of questions about so-called activist federal judges, both liberal and conservative, and the very common practice by both red and blue states to basically judge shop to get the type of ruling they want in the end. The bottom line here is this: most legal scholars agree that the only way this fragile republic of ours is going to hold up is if all three branches of government respect the power and legitimacy of the other branch.